What's going on YouTube? In today's video, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you should not keep a bioactive enclosure. Now you're probably thinking, hang on a sec, the enclosure behind you, the enclosures you have shown in your content, and your content in general are all based around bioactive setups. And you would be correct. But it has become pretty obvious to me lately that bioactive setups are not for everyone. So let's discuss 5 reasons why a bioactive enclosure might not be for you. Reason number 1, expense. Keeping bioactive setups can be very expensive, from the plants themselves to the substrate, lighting, and misting systems that keep them healthy and alive. These things all add up and can be very expensive. Now, there are ways that you can cut costs doing DIY methods, making your own substrates, using cheaper products, but at the end of the day, there are a lot goes into these enclosures and all of that costs money. So if you're not willing to invest the money in a setup like this to create a healthy habitat, then perhaps bioactive enclosures are not for you. Reason number 2, fortitude and patience. Now, this is something that even I struggle with sometimes, but it is inevitable that things are going to go wrong. Plants might die, lighting might burn out, maybe you've got a pond and it leaks like mine did and floods your enclosure. Now you've got to remove all of the substrate, clean it all out, drain it. All of these things can and probably will happen. It is just part of keeping a living ecosystem. Now, I've redesigned the pond in this enclosure several times, and now I've hit a point where I'm very confident that it can't leak. But ponds and even dams on people's properties spring leaks. So you always have to keep it in mind that it is possible. Maybe an animal sits in the flow of water and it redirects to somewhere where water's not supposed to be. So you have to be patient, and it's very, very hard to not get frustrated. But these things are going to happen. So if you're not willing to accept it, then bioactive, probably not a great idea for you. Reason number 3, and honestly, I think this is a major reason why people fail at bioactive setups, is that they fail to realize that by creating a complex ecosystem, they have increased the variables of things that can possibly go wrong. Reality is, you've gone from keeping an enclosure that is the bare essentials for an animal's needs to creating an entire ecosystem with an animal living inside of it, which is great until something goes wrong. Now, the issue with that is, unlike in nature, where an animal can move away from a potential issue, inside of an enclosure, especially a smaller enclosure, they can't get away. They're trapped. Maybe it's mold or bacteria. They're trapped in that environment, which can lead to health issues, which can be a major, major problem of keeping a bioactive setup. So it takes a lot of research and awareness to keep setups like this. So you need to understand the variables that you are creating within the enclosure in order to be successful at keeping this way. Which leads us to number 4, which is time and attention to detail. It takes a lot of time and attention to care for these setups correctly. What I mean by that is you need to be regularly checking how they smell, how the animal is behaving, checking the substrate moisture levels in order to pick up if something has gone wrong, so you can catch it before it becomes a detriment to the animal that is inhabiting the space. So, for an example, when my Thai jungle habitat flooded, I had not realized that the misty nozzles were dripping. It wasn't until I checked the substrate itself that I realized that it was quite boggy, which then led me to check the drainage layer, which is where I found that water had been building up. And luckily, I had done quite a substantial drainage layer, so I was able to catch it before the soil had started building up too much anaerobic bacteria. The water itself smelled horrible. It smelled like sulfur, but when I'd been working in the enclosure, it still smelled like a jungle. It didn't smell too bad. So if you're sticking your head in an enclosure and it smells like rotten eggs, something is very, very wrong. And it should never get to that point before you pick up on the fact that something has gone wrong. So you want to be checking things like the substrate moisture levels in order to make sure that you're catching these things before it affects the animal. So if you don't have time to be checking things properly, regularly, like every day, then bioactive, not for you, like at all. There's a major, major issue. If you do not have time, this is not a shortcut on husbandry at all. In fact, it makes things more complicated. So ease into it, make sure you've got enough time. And I've got, 1, 2, 3, 4 in here and one in another room that are bioactive, and then one that is just naturalistic, which we'll go into a little bit later on alternatives to bioactive setups, because you can have a really nice looking setup without it being bioactive. So make sure you've got the time to do it properly, and make sure you're not overwhelming yourself with the amount of work that is going to be involved. And lucky last, number 5, the space and mess involved in keeping bioactive setups can be quite significant and honestly quite taxing. From the mess involved when you're setting up a habitat, you've got substrate, plants, bits and pieces, hardscape. It all adds up. It all creates mess, which can be a bit of a taxing experience, especially when you've spent hours and hours and hours setting up an enclosure, and now you've got to spend another hour tidying up the mess you just made. A lot of that mess can come from the initial setup itself with your hardscape, substrate, plants, etc. But in general, it can be quite messy, and the amount of extra tools and stuff that you will have to care for these setups can also take up a lot of space. So being aware that this takes up space and will create mess is very important. I prefer large enclosures, especially for bioactive, because it gives me a buffer if something starts to go wrong. Gives me a little bit of a buffer time-wise that I get to notice it before it becomes an issue and fix it. Another thing that I think is very important, especially with bioactive, but with reptiles in general, is to have spare enclosures. So if something does go wrong, I can take that animal, put it in the spare enclosure, make sure its welfare is being provided for, then fix the issue at hand, or completely strip an enclosure and start from scratch. And I don't have to get it done in one day. I have enough time that I can take my time, make sure it's done properly, and it takes a lot of the stress off as well. Now, the reason I think this is important for reptiles in general is you never know when something's going to go wrong. Maybe you get a faulty bulb and it explodes and glasses all through your enclosure. Maybe your wiring burns out. Maybe your thermostat burns out. And all of a sudden you don't have anywhere to house that animal. That is a major issue. So having a spare setup allows you to make sure that animal is cared for while you fix the issue at hand. So definitely keep that in mind with reptiles in general, but especially for bioactive enclosures, because as we spoke about earlier, you've increased the variables of things that can go wrong. So you need to make sure you've got that safety net to provide for your animals. Now, we've gone through this list and you might be thinking, well, why do it at all then? And here's a few reasons why. First of all, aesthetics. These setups just look awesome. So for me, that's a major part of what I enjoy about keeping reptiles. But I understand that's not for everyone. Not everyone cares about that. Some people are happy to keep on newspaper, paper towel, paper kitty litter. There's a million options out there, but for me, this is what I enjoy looking at every day. So my first reason why to do it is aesthetics. Another reason I enjoy keeping this way is the kick I get from seeing new growth on plants. I really have come to love keeping plants in general. In fact, it's become a bit of an addiction, and there is nothing more exciting about keeping a plant than seeing the new growth sprout up and knowing that it's loving the environment that it's in. So I'll show you a few examples now of this, and you'll get a little bit of an insight to what I'm seeing on a daily basis, which is really cool, in my opinion. But honestly, the main reason I enjoy keeping this way is being able to witness the natural behaviors displayed by the animals that I keep. It wasn't until I started keeping in a bioactive manner that I got to witness behaviors such as hunting from bodies of water, hanging over water, waiting for prey to come along when they're hungry, using plants as visual barriers in order to feel safe. All of these things were things that I was missing out on keeping in a more sterile fashion. So by providing an environment that has the functionality that their natural habitat would provide, I am able to witness some amazing behaviors, which makes keeping these animals all that much more enjoyable. Okay, so what if you want to enjoy what I enjoy, but don't have the confidence or don't feel like a bioactive setup is correct for you? This can be done. You can provide the same functionality keeping a naturalistic setup using artificial plants. This reduces the need for water, which can be one of the major things that go wrong inside of a habitat. An example of something you can do without the use of live plants is using artificial plants to create a similar sort of an experience where live plants are not suitable. So for example, up in the basking zone where it is too hot and dry to keep plants alive, I've used artificial ferns to create a nice naturalistic look without the need of unnecessarily killing live plants. Another very good example of this is inside my albino Darwin carpet python enclosure. Now that enclosure is a converted cabinet, which means a couple of things. One, I can't put enough substrate in to have a drainage layer and a good layer of substrate in order to put the plants into, and I can't comfortably put enough water into the enclosure to water those plants and keep them alive. On top of those two things, being an albino, she is quite light sensitive to the point that she won't even bask underneath a halogen bulb. So that means that I can't put the nice bright LEDs to provide for the plants in without negatively affecting her. So that can be another reason you should be thinking whether bioactive is suitable for you at all. Is it even correct for your animal's needs? Or are you just doing it for yourself? I'm going to give you 2 bonus reasons to not keep bioactive. Bonus reason number 1, laziness. If you're deciding to keep bioactive because you think it's going to be less work and that you're not going to have to clean, you are wrong. Even with smaller species such as geckos, they tend to bathroom on spaces that are not accessible for the cleanup crew, like the glass or artificial or real rock surfaces. So you are still going to have to spot clean. With bigger animals, it's even more important because a bigger waste load means that the cleanup crew might not even be capable of breaking it down at all. With carpet pythons, only a small proportion of the waste matter is able to be broken down by a cleanup crew. The rest of it is undigested bone and hair, and therefore is not even going to be on the menu of the cleanup crew and will need to be manually removed. And bonus reason number 2 is access to your animal. The thing with creating a naturalistic environment or a bioactive environment that serves the wants and needs of the animal, you might be creating hiding spots that you don't have access to. After all, in nature, these hiding spots are there to provide that service. These animals want to be in a spot that a predator cannot access them. But in a captive environment, that might mean that you're not able to access your animal whenever you want to. So if handling is something that is very important to you, whether it's yourself or your children, then bioactive might not be the best option for you. And even naturalistic, you need to be very careful with the kind of hides, etc., that you are providing to make sure that you can access your animals still. So it might be a removable hide or a ledge that can be removed. So when you want to access that animal, you can do so. There seems to be this misconception that keeping a bioactive setup is more advanced. It makes you a more advanced keeper and you're providing better for your animal, which is not true. The honest truth about it is you need to be a more advanced keeper in order to keep a bioactive enclosure, because you need to be able to notice all of the issues that can come up and fix them before they make a detrimental impact on your animal. So, is it more advanced? Yes. Is it better? Not necessarily. So the only person that can tell you whether you should keep bioactive or not is you. You need to analyze whether it is the correct decision for you and is right for your animal before deciding whether it is something that you should venture into. It can be a very enjoyable challenge and experience to keep a bioactive enclosure, but that does not in itself make it better for your animal. So analyze your situation, ask the questions, and enjoy keeping regardless of whether it is bioactive or not. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you got something out of it. I hope it made you think a little bit more about the way you keep and the decisions that you make with your keeping, and maybe pay attention to a few things that you hadn't otherwise thought about. Give the video the thumbs up, like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Help the channel keep growing. It is going really, really well and starting to get some really good traction, and that's all thanks to you guys. So thank you so much for that, and I'll see you on the next video.